Welcome, everyone. I feel like I almost did a John Oliver. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Isn't that how he kicks off his shows? Um, Hi, so many good faces. Thank you for joining. I think we're gonna have a really fun conversation to be hosting today. I know it's one past already, but I think maybe we'll give it just another minute or two to let people file in. And yeah, more and more folks joining the waiting room. So just give it another moment so that we can corral as many folks at the very beginning of the meeting as possible. I always feel like I need a little bit of music or something to help us along in the very opening minute or two of these meetings where we're not in person and we're all sitting in our individual offices or living rooms, as it might be. I'm coming to you today from a snowier than expected Boston. I didn't have to shovel though, so I'm kind of happy that I just get to enjoy the nice, pretty new snow that's fallen and enjoy it visually, but not have to actually be out in it. Okay, we have a couple of minutes past the hour here. I think I might just go ahead and officially kick us off so that we can kind of get into our conversation sooner rather than later. I'm just gonna briefly share a few slides and then I will stop the share for the dialogue because I think it'll be more fun to see our speakers today. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our event today, the future of conscious capitalism after COVID. Hopefully that's sooner rather than later. For any of you who have not met me officially, whether in person or virtually, I'm Kelly Tuning. I am a board member of the Boston chapter. I head up the programming and the marketing. So I'm thrilled to have you all be joining us today. Typically our events, we select one of the conscious capitalism tenets, and then we have a thinker and a practitioner or a couple of practitioners that talk about how they think and then operationalize that component of the conscious capitalism philosophy in their business. And today we decided to zoom out just a little bit further. Throughout the pandemic, we've heard an awful lot of news around companies that are kind of best managing their way through the pandemic and these very challenging times. And the companies that are best managing are, there's a myriad of ideas here, the ones that have an ESG focus, the ones that have a stakeholder orientation rather than a shareholder orientation, or those that are conscious companies. And so with that in mind, we wanted to invite in a couple of speakers today that will give us the kind of 30,000 foot view of where this overall movement is heading in this year and beyond. So our speakers are Alexander McCobin, the CEO of Conscious Capitalism, Inc. He's been in that role since 2016. And Curtis Hite, the board member, one of the board members of CCI. He's been in that role since the beginning of 2018. And his day job is CEO and chairman of Improving, which is a technology management and consulting firm. And so before we officially dive in, I just thought I would quickly connect us with the Boston chapter's purpose and vision. So the purpose of our chapter is to connect, educate, and inspire leaders and workers to consciously build businesses that positively impact the world. And then our vision is we will foster the fundamental transformation of capitalism to a healthy, balanced way of doing business for all people and the planet. And then I also wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our corporate members. I won't go through them by name, but you can see them all listed here. We are grateful for the continuing support of their involvement and their membership in the chapter. And then our agenda for the day. It's a pretty quick and easy one. We're going to have a great dialogue and perspective between Alexander and Curtis, and then we'll open up the floor to Q&A. You guys will be able to ask any questions that you bring to this conversation before they even talk, or questions that arise during their conversation. Final housekeeping note, I am recording today's session, so you and anyone else might be interested in watching this after the live event has concluded. It will be available on our website, probably starting tomorrow morning. So with that, I am gonna stop the share and pass the mic over to Alexander and Curtis.
Kelly, thank you. And thank you to everyone who's joining this call today. Curtis and I have been prepping for it. We're really excited to talk with you. And while we're going to start with a conversation between the two of us about where the movement is, what the movement is going to look like going forward, we really do want to open it up into a dialogue with all of you and hear from you what's going on in the Boston area, what you see as the future, and have a discussion. But before we get into that, I want to just introduce Curtis Hite a little bit more, give him a chance to introduce himself, because Curtis really is an amazing conscious capitalist leader who I've had the pleasure of knowing for the past 5 years since I joined Conscious Capitalism. But Curtis, you and I know each other really well. Everyone here may not know you and Improving and your conscious capitalist stories. So I'm wondering if we could just start by giving you a chance to introduce yourself, your background, and go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Alexander. As he mentioned, the two of us have gotten to know each other quite well over the last 4 to 5 years, and it's been a pleasure. I am a single father. I have 2 kids that are 18 and 15 years old. I also run a company called Improving, and Improving has experienced some really significant growth over the last 12 years, and quite proud of that. But I believe that so much of that is rooted in the framework that we build ourselves upon, and that is conscious capitalism. It's one of the things we're here to talk about today. But again, as Alexander mentioned, we want to make this a dialogue. This is simply a Zoom environment. So if you want to raise your hand, you want to interject with a question, this is meant for you. This is not for Alexander or for myself to get into a podium and maybe project our agenda. We would love for you to participate. Hopefully we ask each other some provoking questions that might interest you in participating. And that would be my preferred format. And maybe with that, we kick this off, Alexander.
Let's do it. So I'm going to start with the assumption that everyone here understands the basic principles of conscious capitalism, our tenets of having a higher purpose, stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, and conscious culture. And everyone has their own story of how they came to conscious capitalism. And Curtis, you said that you've built Improving on conscious capitalist principles over the last 12 years, and that's led to the company's success. But can you tell us how you first realized that you were more than just a capitalist, that you were a conscious capitalist, and how that helped build Improving so much?
Absolutely. So for decades, one of my most fundamental values is I'm a free market capitalist. However, not doing it in a way that so many people engage that concept with. And in 2009, a friend of mine, Greg Massey, also on the board now of Conscious Capitalism, invited me to the CEO event down in Austin, Texas. And that event served as an incredible milestone for Improving. And it wasn't just because at that meeting, just like so many people, the most common story we hear is, wow, these people think like we do. That actually happened. And it was more or less what I realized. I knew I'd been doing things different, but there was actually a community of the people that thought about things differently in a way that we were already operating. That is the most common story that we experience. But at this event, we actually, one of the speakers, the keynote at the time, opening keynote, was the inspiration for the real purpose that our company had and has had since 2009. We were formed in 2007, and that served as the basis of the evolution of the purpose and moving forward with that for all these years.
So if I understand, you've had these ideas for a long time, but having the community of like-minded business leaders helped you better understand what this philosophy was, pushed you to adopt a clear higher purpose, and has helped you continue to be a better conscious capitalist over the years.
Absolutely. And given the language for us to communicate, Alexander mentioned the four primary pillars or tenets, right? A purpose beyond making profit, or conscious culture, conscious leadership, and this stakeholder model, giving us the language that we can then communicate to our employees, to the community in general, as we try to evangelize this movement. And that alone is a significant value to people as we get on the same page. Today, I'm actually on a CEO forum that is of all members of this community here in Dallas. There are 12 of us, and we meet every quarter and we discuss. Every quarter focuses on one tenet. And this is where we hope, I believe, that these communities evolve into in each of the cities that we have chapters and operate. It's more than the chapters, more than these leaders coming together trying to make a difference.
So there's a lot for us to unpack there, but I actually want to start with what you just commented on about the pillars and the language of conscious capitalism, providing a framework in which to communicate this to your employees and other stakeholders. And the framework of conscious capitalism at one level is pretty straightforward, but at another level is misinterpreted sometimes when people hear it. And I know that you've got some really important insights on this. So I'm wondering if you could just share some of the common misconceptions that you hear about conscious capitalism out there that we need to be aware of.
That's a great point. When we have a term like conscious capitalism, capitalism has its own stigmas that go with it. In some cases, people think that capitalism is not good, right? And even to the fact that that profits and things like that could be bad. So the first misconception is that it's purpose before profit, right? It's not. We need to have a purpose beyond just making profit. Every business must survive. Profit is the air that businesses breathe. And therefore, sometimes it's a misconception that at all costs, you have to live into the consciousness. And what I can say is there are times where these things have competing commitments, but you must be alive to make a difference. And so that's one of the misconceptions is that profit isn't important. Profit is important. And it's when these two things come together, profit and purpose, it's when they become so powerful. And there's actually an example later here, and I might move to it, Alexander. One of the questions we're thinking about asking is, where have we seen this in this current environment? And there was a company in Dallas that I would say loved the idea, but was always struggling to make profit. But in this current environment that we're in, their business actually benefited from the COVID environment. It was one of those few businesses that thrived in this, had doubled and almost tripled in a 6-month period. In the presence of that profit, the difference they are now able to make, the money they are willing to invest because they went from struggling to thriving, allowed them to live into their purpose, which was an incredible story here in Dallas. And really one of the members of that Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit. So that's one misconception, I think, sometimes. And There are few others, but that's probably one of the biggest. The other comes around purpose, that when you hear the concept of conscious capitalism, people associate that with some social consciousness. And yes, there's so much of that social consciousness, but a purpose does not have to be social in nature. It could be environmental in nature. In our case, it's about our industry. And our industry really struggles with perception. The technology profession in general, amongst CEOs, only has a better perception than the sales profession in general. And I'm like, well, that hurts. That hurts because that's what we do, but that's also a reality. So our ambition is to change that, and by focusing on trust. So a purpose does not have to be social in nature. It can be community in nature. It can have a social, it can be environmental, it can be industry. And that's another misconception, is that all purposes fall into one bucket.
I think those clarifications are so important. And you already started to mention the way that 2020 impacted some businesses in conscious capitalism in that answer. And I want to dig into that with you in particular, because 2020 was a pivotal year for the world. It was pivotal for conscious capitalism as an organization and a movement, for every business in the movement. And I'm wondering if you could share how you were impacted by it. And did you find that your conscious capitalist principles were tested by what was going on or reinforced during 2020?
Oh, there's a lot packed into that question. And yes, 2020, as we all know, out of the ordinary year. Any one of these major events, whether it's the social unrests that were occurring, the COVID and health unrest, the uncertainty around financial with markets pulling back, unemployment that are Great Depression levels. I mean, these things are huge. A president-elect change, and any one of these can be big. And yes, we had them all in the same year. And so I was both personally and professionally impacted by a year. Very few people, I can't imagine, weren't in some way impacted. But I'm going to start when we knew this was happening, and we could sense it in February. One of our clients is in the travel and transportation, as you can imagine, hospitality. Our largest client at the time, actually, we knew they were going to be impacted. So, and then we had a lot of stakeholders that we knew were being impacted. So the very first thing is we called all of our executives together, and I put our guiding principles in front of us. That's not an abnormal event. That happened. I had a town hall last night, and for the first 50%, that's what we focused on of that town hall. But what I reminded everybody in that room is, this is who we are, and this is how we'll behave, and these are the things that will guide our actions. And at the very core of that is conscious capitalism. That is the framework upon which improving has been built, and we need to remember that. And it doesn't mean we won't have to make hard decisions. It doesn't mean we won't have to do things we don't like. But what that means is these are the things that will guide us. And we spent the entire session on the things that will guide us. That is a combination, if you think about it, going into conscious capitalism as conscious culture and conscious leadership. Let's not start talking about the problems. Let's start with talking about who we are and what's going to guide us. Because I have a fundamental belief that character is not revealed in adversity. I mean, it is not built in adversity. It is simply revealed. You have built all the character you have going into any adversity. So it gets revealed. And I was saying, and this is the time for us to reveal. We had a difficult event. We lost 30% of our revenues. Part of it was us going to our clients, one of our stakeholders, and saying, we are going to reduce our rates. We're a consultancy, knowing you are about. We initiated that. We became the standard in 3 different clients. But these were in the industries that we knew were going to be really hammered by this, and we wanted to be a good partner to this. We made sure that every supplier that we were working with got all of its money and cash flow as well. And so we were looking at that, and we had to shift even in the community how we supported it. We run more than we speak and publicly freely give of our knowledge on a weekly basis, where we are presenting and opening up our space to the technology community. It's reaching 40 to 50,000 people a year. Well, in an environment where we do not get to give in that way, how are we going to change? So we had to become creative. So in the end, this framework, Alexander, the whole framework before us was the guiding thing. And we started with our purpose and our guiding principles. And that has led us the entire way through this, let's call it, season.
And what a season that really was.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It wasn't all easy, and it's still not easy, but there are things that I believe we can be proud of.
It certainly sounds like that. And it sounds like the Conscious Capitalist principles helped you get through this. And I'm curious what you're seeing with your other stakeholders, with your suppliers, your clients, others that you've been talking about conscious capitalism with. Was 2020 a year when they really questioned this philosophy that you've been sharing with them for so long? Or did you see any of them actually come around to conscious capitalism because of everything happening in the world?
Sure. Honestly, several people, more coming around and leaning into the tenets. But then at some point, some were kind of revealed. Not many, but you can kind of see where a few of the people may be proclaiming, and that's okay. We are tested. Our character is tested, as I mentioned, and that's a company character, an individual character at times like this. But what I can say is a vast majority of the business leaders that at least I'm working with were finding ways to be caring about their stakeholders as best they could. I was not I'm a part of an organization called YPO. It's a presence organization across the world. And the forums that I'm in that group, I'm going to say 7 out of 10-ish that of those that I was close had to do some form of layoff. That might seem as a contradiction to some of these guiding principles of conscious capital. How can you claim to be a conscious business? Well, the first thing is almost every one of these businesses that did layoffs had no way to get PPP. That includes us. There was no support for improving that was coming. We have a private equity investor, and private equity investor companies were largely, if almost entirely, excluded from any sort of aid. Well, if we know we're losing 30% of the business and overnight, what do? We had to do layoffs, right? And that's not a contradiction to the principles of conscious capitalism. But we laid off about 8%, not 30%. We're not cutting to ensure our profitability. We did a deep dive. What's a realistic recovery, which at the end of the year, we were within 2% of that realistic recovery. Okay, so I'm sorry for the pause, my screen changed. And it was good. We actually did this. Not good for those people. No, that's crushing. But we had to preserve the jobs and the company of those that we could, and not dig a hole that it was so deep that we could not come out of. And so when I look at so many of my friends and colleagues facing similar dilemmas, right? One person had to restructure in our community, completely restructure his business and give it up to outside investors. This was an incredibly thriving business. But let's say you go from owning 95% of it to owning 10% of it because the choice was bankruptcy and keeping everybody employed, but bringing on and giving up your ownership, that was what that person chose. And then I mentioned this other company in Dallas where now that they're thriving, they're giving. So much giving in a time like this, social giving, community giving, giving to the industries, as I mentioned. It's been inspiring.
And what you're describing is what we've been seeing at the national and global level as well with conscious capitalism. At the start of the pandemic, there were media outlets like the Financial Times saying that this was an acid test for conscious capitalism, that in good times, it's well and easy for companies to talk about having a higher purpose and taking care of all of their stakeholders. But in the middle of an economic crisis, they expected businesses to jettison these principles and focus on the bottom line in order to survive. But if anyone's been following Alan Murray over at Fortune or just looking at what's in the headlines in the news, the opposite actually happened. Whether you call it stakeholder capitalism or inclusive capitalism or conscious capitalism, businesses have been maintaining these principles that we've been talking about for years, and more businesses are coming to them than ever before because they recognize that this is the way to get through the current crisis, that this actually is going to be the future of business, almost accelerated as a result of this pandemic, because companies are being watched more closely because they have to take care of their stakeholders in order to retain that loyalty and involvement going forward. And this is valued more than ever. So over the past year, we've seen more businesses actually get involved with the conscious capitalism movement. We've seen more businesses start to use this language, and an interesting transition happening actually. Whereas a decade ago, the concept of conscious capitalism was laughed out of boardrooms. It wasn't put on stage at conferences. It wasn't taken seriously by investors. It is now the norm, at least in rhetoric. People are now saying the right things. The next question is, are they going to implement this effectively? Are they going to understand how to apply conscious capitalism effectively in their business? And for us, it's really important to wonder, are they going to try and reinvent the wheel and actually misinterpret conscious capitalism like you were talking about, Curtis? Or are they going to learn from the businesses and the leaders who have been practicing conscious capitalism for years and decades and actually have models to provide them? And that is a huge opportunity for the whole conscious capitalism movement in 2021 and beyond, to make the pivot from trying to persuade people to these ideas, because we've won that battle, to teaching the principles, not coming in and telling businesses what to do, but providing those examples of companies and leaders who have been doing this for so long that can provide a roadmap for them.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind, Alexander, is this tension sometimes that I mentioned between purpose and profit, and the misunderstanding that, right, you should die solely for purpose, let's say. Well, if you're dead, the purpose dies with you. And that it's such an odd tension. And this is not me making any excuse. It's not. It's actually me facing a reality here that we must, in the abundance of a thriving organization that acts consciously, more abundance creates more consciousness, whatever it is. It just is how it happens. And you would be surprised, even the wealthiest of companies that do not act in the most conscious manners, even that generates a tremendous amount. Look at the largest companies and how much they give to different causes. Even in their abundance, they are giving. And we have to really get more consciousness around that abundance and how do we collectively as a community positively impact. If you haven't read the Conscious Capitalism Credo, I'm just going to tell you, I just reread it and borrowed from it yesterday for our company town hall. It is powerful. Business is a force of good, and probably free market capitalism being maybe the single biggest invention by humans that can have a positive impact on the world. And I believe that.
It is incredibly inspiring, and it rallies more business leaders to get involved. It's a rallying point for all stakeholders, we've found. And what I'll add into that is that there really is a unique opportunity for us to keep evolving what we do as Conscious Capitalism, as an organization and chapters of Conscious Capitalism for this new world, for that pivot to helping businesses really understand how to implement what they're doing by showing best practices. Because before 2020, the whole model that we relied on, both nationally and locally, was in-person events. It was putting on local gatherings in the Boston area, global gatherings like the CEO Summit Curtis talked about. And that was jettisoned by the COVID epidemic. So what we began doing at Conscious Capitalism nationally and globally over 2020 was really think, okay, not only do we need to pivot digitally, that's obvious, but we also need to rethink our entire strategy and go back to the drawing board and ask ourselves, what does it mean to build the conscious capitalism movement in this new environment? And what we realized is that there's an opportunity to work with different stakeholders in different ways. So you've probably seen over the course of 2020 that we started to put a lot of free content about conscious capitalism out in the world, much more than we ever did before, whether with free weekly virtual gatherings or articles on conscious capitalism in action or videos with CEOs describing what they're doing and sharing what's coming from the rest of the community. That's because we need to reach as many people as possible with this message. And that means we just need more examples of conscious capitalism put out there beyond the principles and the abstract theory. We need to put the face of business leaders on conscious capitalism and show what it really means for people to resonate with. And the way that we're getting those stories aside is from asking the community, tell us who are the great examples that we're able to use this for, but also working with senior leaders, especially of mid-market and larger companies that work with hundreds and thousands of stakeholders, to help them connect with each other, to share best practices, and to give us their stories that we're able to use to power the rest of the movement. So we actually piloted a whole new senior leader network last year to provide that structure for these leaders that received so much overwhelmingly positive feedback that we're going to be launching in 2021 and opening up for more senior leaders to be able to connect with at the national and global level. And in fact, also utilize that to get them more involved at the local level too, to be more involved as leaders in their local chapters, to speak to chapters about their experiences, and to both represent their local area to the global movement and bring best practices back to what they're doing there. And this opportunity to just connect conscious capitalists more at both the local and national/global level really is, from my perspective, the biggest opportunity for the conscious capitalism movement in 2021. And then when we get to the other side of this pandemic, to keep growing this movement in a more scalable way to get to that future where this is just the norm. This is just how people practice business, and this is just how people perceive it.
One of the things that kind of reminds and triggers in me is not only one of the biggest opportunities, but what are some of the biggest challenges in the movement, Alexander? Alexander has not heard this from me yet, so I'm going to take this forum as communicating it. But he alluded to this, the growth right now, the momentum, some of the rhetoric and attention that conscious capitalism is getting, both formally and informally across the globe and in the US, is causing the ranks to swell and grow. And I actually view part of that growth, or an aspect of that growth, is one of the biggest challenges that we face as an organization, because any movement that has a large component of grassroots aspects to it gains many benefits. It gains creativity, it gains personal ownership, and that's actually the things that help grow the movement. Yet as it grows, all of a sudden that same strength can cause challenges that are unintended, like consistency and like pure autonomy, wanting to go off and do. And so this careful dynamic of leading an entire movement across the globe and doing it in a way that the messaging is consistent, that these local chapters that have thrived and even spurred on the moment have to embrace some sort of change. I see that as probably one of the biggest challenges. And I would be curious to hear what you think would be the challenge, your biggest challenge.
I appreciate that, Curtis. And yeah, we have not talked about this before, but what I actually think you're hitting on something really important here, because for a long time, the movement was pretty small. It was a core group of businesses and leaders who shared a common philosophy, and it was growing a little bit, but we really are hitting a turning point, or a pivotal point, where we're seeing just rapid growth for the entire movement as more people get interested. And so it's incredibly important for us to develop the right structures and the right culture that allows for that growth, because it's not a given that it's going to continue. We have to make the right investments, have the right people and the right processes and values and culture in order to support that. So I think it's across the board with everything that we're doing. Are we ready for that growth? And are we setting things up so that we take advantage of this opportunity rather than squander it? So in that sense, I would absolutely agree with you. That is the biggest challenge facing the conscious capitalism movement right now. But we've been going back and forth a lot for the past half hour. We said we wanted this to be a dialogue with everyone here. Let me just ask if anyone wants to type in the chat or unmute yourself or raise your hand. I think we'd love to take questions from you and have a conversation with everyone else.
Great. I'll let people digest that for just a moment and see if they have any questions. If you want to submit it in the chat, I would be happy to read out any questions and kind of facilitate a Q&A here. And but we're also in an environment where people can unmute. So is there anyone who wants to raise their hand?
And maybe type into the chat or your biggest challenge that maybe you faced in the environment, or how are Alexander and I handling XYZ, some challenge that you might anticipate. Anything current, work from home or work from the office, or I don't know, diversity and inclusion. Both Alexander and I welcome any questions that you may have. So,
indeed. We do have a couple hands raised, so maybe as people are doing that and we can go back and forth. Julie, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, there I go. I'm unmuted. Hi, everybody. Julie Hall, CEO and founder of Communitas Global here in Boston. Thank you so much for sharing with us your challenges. I think we can all relate for sure. My question is about measurement. One of the things that we often hear from CEOs and even more importantly from boards is, how are you measuring the impact of purpose and measuring the impact of conscious capitalism? What is the ROI, and what are some of the benchmarks that you're looking at to be able to talk about that return on your responsibility?
Wow, that's an interesting question. In some ways, in certain things, I'm unlike many CEOs. I measure things, especially leading indicators, but I'll act on faith that things will happen afterwards. To give you an idea, even in this environment, we did 358 public speaking sessions last year in the 2020. We reached more than 14,000 people in that audience. And what we are trying to do, as I told you, we're an industry and we're trying to change the perception in our industry. We are trying to give back, give freely of our time, knowledge, and experience. And we are measuring that, as you can see, public speaking. We also host events. Normally it was in our space, but we had to reimagine that. So instead, we start hosting sessions like we're having today, even big groups, some of them about 800. It was our largest in this, and we create the environments to host these and the facilitations, and we hosted more than 400 of these events last year, again reaching more than, when we look collectively, probably 25,000 people. I have the exact numbers and metrics. Metrics are very important, but those two metrics align straight with our purpose. We use a balanced scorecard. And the 4 areas in our balanced scorecard are our services, the services that we provide, and measuring that. But that goes into culture, because one of our commitments is to excellence, and we have a number of ways of measuring excellence. But we also have a culture, and we have a culture of involvement, of building trust. So we measure those. All of our clients actually rate us on trust and building trust and these 13 behaviors. And then we have finance and we have operations as part of that balanced scorecard. I cannot tell you how important these measurements are. And if you struggle, we can, and you can measure your values even. We do it. And we've been doing it for years. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And what's interesting, I'll just add, is that we get this question a lot too. And when you have a higher purpose as one of your core tenets, and companies have different higher purposes, that means they have different metrics that they need to use to measure whether they're achieving their purpose or not. And it really is incumbent on management and the board to talk through what are the best indicators of whether they're getting an ROI to achieve their purpose, and whether this fits their culture and their values, and be willing to reflect on that regularly. The conscious capitalism doesn't provide an easy checklist for what companies can do. Do these 10 things and you're done. Rather, it actually puts a greater burden on leaders to be deep thinkers and to have more conversations about what's important to the company. And in this case, it requires management and the board to really talk about what those metrics should be for that specific company.
You know, Alexander, I want to interject too. It is one of the things. There are a number of organizations, not a huge number, but a small handful, that have very similar philosophies about capitalism. And one of the things I like about the conscious capitalism perspective is this is a framework. It actually provides the pillars about what to focus, but you have to do the creative work. It's not just a checklist of qualifications and now you can claim you're one. No, this is a framework which you do the creative thinking, you do the implementation of it. So it's one of the big differences that I appreciate about conscious capitalism over some of these other similar organizations.
That was great.
Thank you.
I think we have another question from Larry.
Hi, everyone. Larry Bingaman here. Hi, Alexander and Curtis. I'm the founder and past board chair of the Connecticut chapter of Conscious Capitalism, and CEO of the Regional Water Authority in New Haven, Connecticut. But we know how important culture is for really anything that we're trying to achieve as an organization. And certainly, culture is a combination of the values that management exhibits on a day-to-day basis, particularly at moments of truth when they make decisions. It's the day-to-day interaction with employees, and it's also the kind of employees that you hire. But a new employee coming into an organization, they may have joined that particular company because of the practice of conscious capitalism, but perhaps Curtis and Alexander, you could talk about what you've seen as the most effective ways to, I'll say, orient or onboard a new employee coming into an organization to get them aligned with the conscious capitalism principles so that they can then, on a day-to-day basis, implement the principles in their daily activities.
Alexander, do you want to take this or want me to, or maybe both?
I'd love for you to start, because you are onboarding employees into the conscious capitalism philosophy regularly.
Absolutely. So the first thing I'll say is it doesn't start at the onboarding. When I'm interviewing and when other people are interviewing, the discussions about our guiding principles are started early on. because just like any other type of relationship building, if you're in a dating relationship, it has to be good for both parties. And we need to express who we are. In fact, we don't call our values, we call it our identity, because this is who we are. And it composed of 3 high level, and then there are guiding principles, but a commitment to excellence, which we kind of paraphrase as it's not some occasional act, but a consistent habit. And the second is dedication. We actually, again, describe that as thinking of others a little bit more without thinking less of ourselves. And then finally, involvement, that the improving success has been a consequence, an odd word, but intentionally used, of our collective involvement. And if those 3 things don't resonate with you, I can assure you you're not for us, because they are so pervasive. If you're occasionally spiking into excellence and coming down, we ask you not to come on board. If you are a primary self-oriented person, that is fine. There is no judgment. You know, some people are that way, some people are not. But what I'm going to say is you are going to feel very uncomfortable here. And if you are leave work at work, you come and you turn on the work switch, and you then go home and turn off the work switch. We are way more involved in that. Everybody is involved in the company. We do town halls together. We do family events together. We do date nights together. I'm not kidding. We are, even in this pandemic, we created drive-in theaters on top of garages for people to drive their cars, drive by. We're involved. And if that's not you, then you're not us. So my biggest advice here actually would be to overemphasize that prior to the hiring. And then if that's not enough of a dose, it is the starting point, including what we call our 6-hand story, the whole story about what happened at that 2009 Conscious Capitalism event that lived into our purpose. That's your starting point in the company, meaning you get to sit down, and before you hear about anything else, we're hearing about our culture and guiding principles. So it has to be pervasive, and it can't be lip service. It can't just be me. It has to be other people that can so fluently talk about our identity and everything like that. But we emphasize it every day. We talk about it in our stand-ups across the company.
And that's what I was going to add on for us as we both onboard employees at Conscious Capitalism Inc. and as we talk with other businesses. There's only so much that you can do in the actual onboarding process, in the half day, 1 week, however long it is that you're introducing people to the company. So much of it is about reinforcing these points, and again, having those conversations on an ongoing basis. It's about what you do week in and week out to bring this to people. So incorporating conscious capitalism and its principles and how you're applying it into your weekly meetings that you have with team members, into the way that you review individuals and making sure they realize that they're accountable for this. It's not something that's just written on the walls. And being very clear about that and coming back to it over and over again. And that's what we've seen that as most helpful to onboard more individuals into this, as well as then to make it sticky so that it really stays with them beyond just having them read a book or watch a few videos, so that they're really ingrained in this, in the culture.
And there's so many ways to make culture pervasive. To me, that's the, not the easy button, but if you give a little bit of thought and you create persistent habits, it's a fairly easy thing to do. Easy to understand. Let me put it that. Easy to understand, but not necessarily easy to do. So misquoting myself, just disagreed with myself.
Thank you for that. We have another question from Tom.
Yeah, how you doing, Curtis? Good to see you again. I met you in Dallas. Alexander, always good. Lee Wright was trying to tell you that the chat is disabled. So that was one thing I wanted to pass along. The other thing is we try to use the field guide to the with our members, particularly with our corporate members. There's a couple of, Raj has got a, no offense, Raj, dumb and dirty assessment. There's a couple of them in there. Also, there's kind of a renegade conscious business assessment that was developed a couple of years ago. So it's a quasi measure. But it creates a great conversation. We try, and again, I'm from Rochester, New York, so thanks for allowing me to attend. But it helps, like Curtis was saying, celebrate what you're doing good, that you're working on, and then be open to say, well, gee, that might be something I want to focus on, do it with the CEO and or the leadership team. And that's what we've tried to do and continue to do with our corporate members, to get them together to share some of that. That's what I got.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, those are two of the, what we promote as part of the conscious leadership. There's a lot that we involve in that, but celebrating successes of the company, celebrating successes of others, that's hard for some people to do, right? Some people, oh, that person got a promotion, I didn't. This isn't about whether you did or not. That everybody in the company that deserves a promotion at the time gets these things, right? And so celebrate and take the time. Far too often we're trying to run so fast that we don't celebrate with each other, and then be open, even open with yourselves. One small trick, a lot of people have these great ideas, and they really are great ideas that are a little bit harder to implement, and they go, guess what? It's 2021. We are going to do this for the next year. Why make the time frame a year? Just say for Q1, we're going to do this. And at the end, we're going to evaluate and see. We're going to be open to changing the very thing. When you prescribe something for too long of a period without testing it, it actually closes things down. So when you talk about openness and open to change, or make it easy on yourself to change. Plan the change right on in there. We're doing it for 90 days and then we may be changing versus having to always. So that's a small trick, is shorten the time frames and create the opportunity for openness to change.
That's great. Thank you, Curtis. Any other questions? That we have just a couple more minutes here. Oh, we do have another question, I think, from Tara. So she advises small conscious companies that are building amazing businesses with conscious DNA from day one. They need conscious clients and conscious capital to scale and grow. How to best connect with other mid-market and large conscious capitalism businesses? Thanks, Tara.
So I think I'll jump in there, Curtis, because that is great that you're working with these amazing businesses, that they're looking for others to work with here. And so that's where this senior leader network that I mentioned earlier on is really going to be useful, because this is a space where businesses are able to connect with other companies that are on the conscious capitalist journey, with other leaders, not that are around the country and the globe, to get best practices from them, to get support from them, as well as find ways to work together. This is not a place to solicit or to try and sell services. That is explicit in the framework, but that does naturally happen as you find other people that you trust, who share your common philosophy with you, that you want to do business with and they want to do business with. So if you want to learn more about that as an opportunity for your clients, feel free to email me after this. It's alexander@consciouscapitalism.org, and I'd be happy to share more information with you as we start to roll this out.
I have one more thing from our playbook. We used to host all these events at our space. We can now host events across all geographies. Even though Boston is conducting this event, I'm always amazed that 3, 4, 5 chapters don't get together just for one event. It costs nothing. And so if you want to connect with more people, maybe encourage, the communities are one of the best ways to connect. Join one of the Dallas Conscious Capitalism events. That they're all online. Join one of the ones that are in Atlanta. These are big chapters with several hundred members. You don't just have to connect locally. You can start connecting in this. It's easier than ever to connect in the broader. And for chapters, I want to encourage the collaboration between chapters, right? One event can be 4 chapters. And I think that that might be a great thing for chapters to consider.
I totally agree. I was going to jump in here and say that just the local chapters are a great resource. And Curtis, you pointed out that in this environment, we can have significant access to multiple chapters, which is great. I think we might have time for one last question that came in from the chat. This is from Deborah Smith, who's one of our fellow board members. As conscious capitalism goes, more global advancing best practices, how does this complement or augment the B Corp companies as they grow globally?
All right, Alexander.
This is a great question, and it really helps clarify where conscious capitalism fits into this larger space of the many organizations that are working on business as a force for good. Because what B Corp is doing is very different from what conscious capitalism is doing. They're about certifying businesses. They have a checklist of things that they think every company should do and you can get rated on. We don't do that because we're about, as Curtis was sharing before, about the values a company has and the approach that they take. It's not a one size fits all. And because B Corp is a certifying organization, they actually don't go in and tell businesses what to do or help them make changes because there's a conflict of interest for them to do that. So both help a company be able to pass a certification and then certify them. So they only focus on the certifying. That leaves an incredible space and opportunity for us to actually work with companies to help them utilize these tenets and principles to just be a better business and then hopefully get certified by B Corp because we're there helping them out and they're learning from others who have done this before. And that's a real opportunity for us to lean into to complement what B Corp is doing and fill different niches in this larger market, especially as it grows.
Agreed. Curtis, any comment on that?
No, I agree with what Alexander said. There's actually a little bit more of how, even though you still have to get creative in the conscious capitalism. These are 4 things you can focus on. And it's why we use it as our framework, why we even call it our philosophy of conscious business. But again, I want to emphasize for those that are on the call, if you haven't taken the time, once a quarter, maybe I do it more frequently, once a month, go out, read that credo out there under conscious capitalism. It's inspiring, right? We can have an impact and we're going to make a bigger impact collectively if we actually come together with the unity and as the chapters learn to work more together and to support the conscious capitalism movement. We are a movement, and let's get this grassroots in Boston and other places growing, but let's also get the greater picture going and make an impact in this world. I think we can.
Agreed. And with just a single minute left in the hour, any final words from Alexander and Curtis?
I'll just add on to what Curtis shared there and everything else by saying thank you to everyone here for all the work that you're doing in building the Boston chapter and building the conscious capitalism movement in the Boston area and in other areas too. It's great to see some other chapter leaders joining from outside of Boston because we are at an incredible moment for the movement. This really is an inflection point and an opportunity for us to scale this cause at a greater speed than anything we've seen before. And you're all leading that charge. So just want to say thank you. And if there's anything we can do to help you more, please reach out at any point.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both. This was great. This was really fun to have both of your perspectives. I think that was really valuable. I did just pop into the chat, and I will just as the final word that I share here. Our next event is February 25th, and as we talked some about here today, there isn't, an exact checklist, but there are some tools and different assessments that are available that companies can use to get a handle on kind of where they're at in the journey to becoming a more conscious company. And so what we're going to do on February 25th is have one of our corporate members, Eric Piazzio, who's the president of American Surgical, join both Bob and myself to talk through what some of those assessments are that can be used, as well as some tools and exercises that you might be able to even use in your company to further your implementation and I can't say that word, operationalizing the conscious capitalism tenets in your own organization. So that should be fun. I popped the link into RSVP to that into the chat. So I just want to conclude by saying thank you. Thank you to everybody for joining. Thank you to Alexander and Curtis for your time today. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.